Hey guys, welcome to the very first episode of the NILG.AI Podcast. Today we will have Alejandro Machado with us talking about the intersection between artificial intelligence and blockchain cryptocurrencies. We will talk about how have cryptocurrencies supported people within humanitarian crisis and hyperinflationary economies, such as the case of Venezuela. We will also talk about how can blockchain support new business initiatives, new business models, new applications based on artificial intelligence, as well as the main challenges of data governance and blockchain together. We will also talk about how AI can support blockchain development, as well as regulatory aspects of it. What is our opinion regarding the regulation of the blockchain cryptocurrency world? I hope you enjoy this podcast. Stay until the end. Enjoy, guys. Hi, welcome to the first episode of the NILG.AI Podcast. Today we have Alejandro Machado with us. I met Alejandro about 15 years ago, where we started studying computer engineering in Venezuela at the Universidad Simón Bolívar. And I remember that Alejandro and another common friend, whose name is Aldo, they told me in 2009 about a research group named Grupo de Inteligencia Artificial, Artificial Intelligence Group, GIA. I asked myself to Alejandro what the hell was artificial intelligence. So the truth is that, we started working as research assistants there. Alejandro most likely was the first person that mentioned the word artificial intelligence to me. So it's an honor for me to have him as in the very first episode of the NILG.AI Podcast. Since then, I have been working on AI exclusively. So it's like a milestone, I will say. It's an honor, Alejandro, to have you here. So we started working mainly on classical AI at the time, automated planning and scheduling. And after concluding the degree in computer engineering, Alejandro got a master's degree in human-computer interaction from Carnegie Mellon University. And he started shifting from more technical domains to more product design, product owner. Then he got interested in blockchain in 2017 as a way of solving monetary problems. That led him to funding the Open Money Initiative, a nonprofit organization that produces research findings and insights on how money is managed in places with experiencing hyperinflation, capital controls, and criminalization of free markets, which led him to Value as the head of research to pursue his vision of granting access to stable currency, the division to granting access to stable currencies in Latam, depreciating and hyperinflationary economies. Alejandro is now the product manager at Bitrefill, facilitating daily life transactions such as gift cards, mobile refills, among others, through cryptocurrencies. So Alejandro has this path that has moved from AI, very technical and hardcore problems, to solving human problems, mainly with blockchain. So I thought it was quite interesting to have you here. Moreover, since we started this journey of AI together, I'm very glad that you made it here to our very first episode of the podcast, where we will discuss how can AI and blockchain solve human problems together. Welcome, Alejandro.
Thank you. It's very nice to be here.
So I would like to start getting the foundations of this. So AI and blockchain are like two very hype words overall. Our work here at our channel is to explain you what is AI. So I guess if you are watching this video, you already know what is AI. But Alejandro, can you explain us a bit, if, assuming I am 5 years old or 7 years old, what is the blockchain?
Well, so I think the first thing I would say is a lot of people say the word blockchain as if it were an area of knowledge. We were just talking about this earlier when we were coming here. Artificial intelligence is a big term, it's a huge term, because it's not only a technology, it's not only a way of solving problems, but it's also an area of knowledge, right? Blockchain, I would say, is more, it's a very applied technology, and it's like saying database, right? Like if I say, what problems can database solve? First, I think you would say not database in singular, but in plural, right? Like what problem can databases solve? So I think that the right way to ask the question is more like, okay, we have blockchains, which are a specific kind of database, maybe an evolution of the database in some particular direction. What can they help us solve, right? I think the first thing that, again, it's a hype word, so we need to demystify it a bit. One of the things to realize is a blockchain is a database where every user can be a root user. Every user can have write access over the database, and that means that to protect the database, to ensure that it only contains valid information, or information that is meaningful, it needs to have mechanisms in place to do that. So it's an environment where you can have a shared state, a vision of shared state. So far, because we can talk in abstract terms for a very long time, but I think just to land the discussion in much more practical terms, so far I think blockchains have been successful at only one thing right now in the decade that it has existed as technology, and that is monetary or financial infrastructure. So movement of assets that we consider valuable. We can move digital assets around on blockchains because these are databases that the world can agree they represent ownership over certain tokens, over certain things. And if those tokens become tradable on markets around the world, then that becomes a way for you to move value from one place to another. And it's very interesting in the case of borderless finance, right? So there are startups, fintech startups that like TransferWise, now Wise, Revolut, neobanks, right, like that are trying to make those money movements easier, but they're rooted in the traditional system. They're still banks, they're still operating like banks. Blockchains are this idea that value can flow just like the internet, just like information, from one place to another without necessarily having intermediaries.
Okay. So you will say that the trust is not deposited on a single entity, but it's more on the consensus mechanisms that are implicit in
you always need trust. I think there's also this myth that blockchains are trustless, or that you don't trust anyone if you're using a blockchain. That's not true. You're trusting the developers of the software that's running the blockchain. You're trusting the operators of in some cases the operators of the nodes that are running the blockchain. In some cases those who hold the private keys, that have admin access to the blockchain. In some ways, blockchains are very different, right? Like the Bitcoin blockchain is very egalitarian, right? It's very democratic in the sense that I can run a Bitcoin node and I can enforce the rules that the software that I run is enforcing. No one has special privilege over like for example, having a transaction. If I see a transaction that I don't like, and I want to use the Bitcoin protocol, I can't just say that transaction is invalid. You need to conform with the protocol rules, and as long as the transactions are valid, like are well formed, then the software that I run needs to validate it. Otherwise, I'll just get kicked out of the network, right? Like my node will no longer be recognized or won't be relevant in identifying which transactions are valid or not. So that's the example of the blockchain that is the oldest, which is the Bitcoin blockchain. Ethereum works in a similar way, but nowadays there are more blockchains that are more closed in nature, or that where there are admins that have special privileges and they can roll back certain transactions or do some things that are privileged users. But I think that the original notion of blockchains started with Bitcoin, and also another term that we use to describe this area is crypto, in cryptocurrency. Crypto can mean cryptography as well. Cryptography is obviously a lot broader than just cryptocurrency, but cryptocurrency is also a good term because so far I think the main use case that we have found for this new kind of database is moving assets around, and it's financial infrastructure.
Yeah, I agree, and I guess most of the bad perception people have around blockchain has been due to bad usages, I guess, of these financial mechanisms with shitcoins and all, of these.
Yeah, and in many cases, it's not necessarily a bad use of the technology per se. Not because most tokens, for example, that in 2017, when I was first interested in this, there was a huge boom in what they called ICOs, initial coin offering, right? And this has a mirror in the traditional world with IPO, right? The initial public offering, when you make a company public, right? Like when you start offering the shares of this company to anyone. And this is a regulated process in many countries, and I think maybe all countries.
ICOs or
IPOs?
ICOs are not regulated.
So well, ICOs, yes, they fall under regulation. It's just that sometimes people choose to ignore the regulation, right? And sometimes people disagree on whether something is a security, right? Like an asset where there's expectation of future profit driven by a common enterprise. That there's a definition in the law of the United States and other places on what exactly constitutes a security, which is the asset that is regulated, or a type of asset that you can't just sell to the public, right? Because if you're a salesman of bottled water, you can obviously offer that to the public with very little regulation, right? Maybe if it's something that you consume, there's a little bit of regulation, but if you sell books, there's very little regulation. You sell regular stuff, it's not very regulated. But if you're offering a promise that something will be worth more in the future, that starts to get more into the weeds of lottery, or you're selling promise, right? And of course that some scammers, some bad actors can right on top of that infrastructure and offer things that maybe willingly or maybe unwillingly, because maybe they had good intentions in the beginning, but they realized that they couldn't fulfill the mission, so they drop out and they take the money, right? So I think there's good reason why these things are regulated. But yeah, I think going back to the kind of the root of the conversation, ICOs were very popular in like around 2017, and now we're seeing a lot of lawsuits and a lot of problems arising from or people who lost money, who are suing the operators of this coin or this token. And I think we are seeing it not as an objection to the technology itself. It's not, no one's saying, oh, blockchain, like the blockchain specifically is what enables this, or it needs to ride on blockchains, but I think it does make it easier to issue something that a lot of people can agree, oh, this might have value, right?
Yeah. At the international level.
And it's international. So if I am sitting in Dubai, where there's very little regulation on these things, I can sell things to people in the US where there's a lot of regulation on these things, and the US doesn't want US citizens and residents to be able to even buy things. It should be a free thing, you could argue, right? Like, you could like spend your money on whatever you want, but in the US there's very strict regulation on US residents and citizens can only buy things that are approved by the government in this case of securities, right? And it's weird because sometimes we think about the US as a very free place, but these laws are very strict. And the latest iteration of the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission in the U.S., has shown their teeth in the last few months, especially with the old FTX debacle, which we can get into. But yeah, a lot of scammers in the space for sure. There's a lot of bad actors in the cryptocurrency space, maybe more than in the overall technology space. Because it's the financial system. Also, you see crooks and scammers in the financial system. Banks are fined all the time for money laundering and for all kinds of things that you never hear in the media because they get a fine. It's not news, right? It's not news anymore, and they're also protected. Like, they're protected members of society. They're connected to government. They're well connected to other parts of society. The wealthy families support them, so they get a slap in the wrist and it's fine, right? In cryptocurrency, I think we're seeing a lot of new wealth being generated. Some of it, you could argue that it's legitimate, and some of it maybe not so legitimate because they've been selling smoke. But it's difficult to tell, and I think we have seen very little sophistication in governments to target the bad actors specifically, and not the industry as a whole. So it's a bit unfortunate that
it's a bit of the misunderstanding overall of the system and trying to punish the technology and not the actor, which I guess is kind of what could happen in AI. Now we are talking about regulating AI,
yeah.
And what I have seen is like the target is AI as a technology or as a knowledge area, not so much as the application of the AI sometimes, or the specific bad actors that could be on the system.
Yeah.
So I never thought about blockchain just as a database, the decentralized database. So I think that will be interesting to get into that later on the podcast, because AI relies entirely on data that you can trust. Mm-hmm. So it's quite nice that we have here some trust mechanisms. But I would like to know about first your story. So what brought you to cryptocurrencies, to blockchain as a whole? So from 2017, you told me it was like your first contact with crypto up to now. What brought you here?
Well, so I think maybe we can go a little bit earlier than that. We used to work in AI together. It was a really fun time, and I used to enjoy, I explored a lot of spaces. Like I've always been a person more breadth, right? Like I like to explore different areas of knowledge and figure out how to connect them. For me, I think a PhD is almost unthinkable because it's about getting very deep in the topic. I like more, exploring different spaces. But in the very beginning, we had very good professors in our University of AI, and I think we took that opportunity, and then you took that opportunity further and went into AI. But for me, I was just still playing around with things. I got into human-computer interaction because I wanted to solve or to kind of combine human intelligence with my previous curiosity around machine learning or machine intelligence, like planning, scheduling, and more classical AI. So I was kind of dabbling in that space, and then I was also interested in startups. So I joined a couple of startups that didn't have a lot to do with AI or with my previous areas of work, but just to get to know how small companies operate and how you can grow a company from very small stage to a much larger stage. And yeah, around 2017, and we're both Venezuelan, and we both had to migrate, right? And this affected our families and affected everyone we know. And I think my link to Venezuela, because my entire family left, my uncles, aunts, everyone, pretty early, like around 2015 or so. And we have gradually seen more and more people of our family leave. And I think I emotionally wanted to have some connection to Venezuela. And I was reading a lot about Venezuela on this media site called Caracas Chronicles, and I was sometimes writing about Venezuelan things for them as well. And it's a great group of people that it's Venezuelans living abroad trying to make sense of the country and trying to explain the country to others. So that was also helpful to me as I wrote. I was having to have these same conversations over and over with friends that I met when I was living in Berlin, when I was living in San Francisco or wherever. And writing helped me, point to the article and say, well, I mean, I started the discussion obviously in person, but then, you want to find out more? There's a lot. I mean, I have a doctor friend who knows about the malaria situation in Venezuela, and I have, kind of experts in different fields of like how the country is collapsing, and they can tell you their perspective, their Venezuelan perspective, sometimes living abroad, sometimes still living there, but it was an interesting group of people that we all coalesced around this. And I had a couple of articles on startups in Venezuela and how I saw the situation. You worked at a startup called Predictvia. I saw some things in that batch of startups that were interesting, but also I think my very first article was about the pay gap between Venezuelans and non-Venezuelans, or between like people. You could, at the time that you were still working there, you could find really good talent, like fresh out of school, but really, we had really good professors, and we were really, really well educated, and we could aspire to a good salary. But I think in the beginning, companies kind of try to take advantage of the fact that they could hire for a lot less in Venezuela. So I was writing about that phenomenon, and I think just thinking and talking about Venezuela, there was the very first instance where I got really kind of maybe upset about something was when the government tried to create a cryptocurrency, right? And I wasn't particularly interested in cryptocurrency then, but I was interested in how the country was, collapsing, or I was trying to find ways to help, and writing about it made me feel better, and maybe also informed some of the people around me. But it was a very small way to help, right? And so when I when I found out then that Venezuela was creating its version of cryptocurrency, I had read about cryptocurrency. I had read the Bitcoin white paper, and I knew tangentially about the area of knowledge, but I wasn't particularly interested. But when that happened, I was like, well, I mean, this can actually decide the fate of the country. If we are going to reinvent the way people are moving money around, and if it's going to be centralized around the government that we had at the time and that we still have, that has a lot of inefficiencies and is very corrupt. I thought, well, I mean, this can really be the end game, right? I was very concerned, And so I decided to learn more about it, and especially how we could build something if a group of Venezuelans got together, a group of technologists, a group of people who cared about solving problems for Venezuela and maybe other places that have similar situations, if we could, provide an alternative to the state cryptocurrency.
Yeah, just to give you a bit more of context on Venezuela. So at the time, we couldn't transact on any other currency other than the national currency. So there was this. So we were forbidden basically from transacting in US dollars, euros, whatever. Everything was approved or rejected by the state, very low amount. So Venezuelans didn't have any actual true way of moving money around.
To exchange money to other currencies.
Which, in the case, I guess, of employees in Venezuela, were in a very disadvantageous position where they couldn't actually transact directly with foreign companies. Mm-hmm. So they had to keep their expectations low on salaries, while companies that were in multiple countries could easily arbitrage, in that case, the fact that they had a very low cost of labor, while payments were moved, I guess, around. I guess that was a big issue financially in Venezuela. So you got, I guess, at that time into getting more knowledge about the petro, which I guess was kind of a joke at the time.
Right? They called it a cryptocurrency, but it was just a database. It was a regular database dressed up as a cryptocurrency. They even made some tests with forks of existing cryptocurrencies. I think they made a test with Dash, with one of the cryptocurrencies that are, faster and have privileged access to some nodes and so on. They tried to make something and to convince the world to invest in their ICO, right? Like, remember, they because that was part of the play. They wanted to raise money and to find what new ways to get money. I think oil was really low at the time. And the government essentially needs oil and needs to extract resources to survive or to hold on to power. So I think they tried that. It didn't go very well. And the petro is used very little in Venezuela. It was never used widely. Now they're shutting it down. We just heard news in the last 2 weeks that it's going to get shut down. But yeah, at the time I was like, wow. I mean, I overestimated I've overestimated their capacity to execute this thing, but I think that's a good thing in my career progression or my interests, because I think I got interested in something that I think has potential not only in Venezuela, but I think in other places around the world where there's a lot of injustice and a lot of lack of opportunity to access the international order, right?
Yeah, so then you funded the Open Money Initiative at the time, trying basically to help these kind of transactions.
Yeah, our approach was, okay, we don't know how this technology as a whole might help, and we don't know much about how Venezuelans are using money today, because you remember, it used to change very quickly. Back in 2018, when we started the research, the dollar was forbidden. Like, you could, I think, technically transact in dollars, but exchanging bolivars for dollars was, you could go to jail for that. So people were very scared about using dollars in public. But then there was a big blackout that happened in 2019, in March of 2019, and that's when we were doing our research. And we realized that after the blackout, people realized that they could use their dollars in public, and no one would actually know or care enough to actually punish them. Because we had a scarcity of actual physical banknotes, and like the Bolivar banknotes. So there was no cash on the street other than dollars in cash. So people couldn't pay for, I think, 3-4 days because all the systems were down, all the databases were down. So people were like, okay, I mean, I have this dollar bill and I'm going to try to pay with it, because otherwise I can't buy things. I can't continue with my life. And so I think people started realizing that in 2019, Venezuela unofficially dollarized, right? People started to transact in dollars more and more, and I think that also contributed to the petro not actually taking off, because obviously if you can choose between hard currency that you can, first, it's very familiar, it's very user friendly, because you know a dollar bill and you kind of has an aspirational value, like having dollars is a good thing, like for not just for now, for decades Venezuelans have tried to save in dollars, or they have a status, like the dollar has a status, a symbol, right? Like it's very coveted, and because the petro wasn't really technically operationally well functioning, it never, I think, got support from the banks, which are the ones who know how to run financial infrastructure in Venezuela. So I think the government just wanted to make this happen on its own, and it didn't. Yeah, at the time there was a lot of uncertainty and a lot of rapid changes on how people were using money in general, and some people were using cryptocurrency, specifically Bitcoin, because it was the most liquid one, and there was a very neat product called Local Bitcoins that has since then shut down as well. It shut down this year, that allowed people to trade Bitcoins for local currency. Nowadays there's other alternatives. There's Binance, there's Eldorado, there's other marketplaces where you could do this same thing. But Local Bitcoins was the first one, and it was a huge market. I think at its peak, maybe $1.5 million a day or something exchange hands in that market.
1.5 million in Venezuela.
1.5 million a day in Venezuela. 1.5, something like that.
Okay, so that's 45. That's at least $1 a month per Venezuelan, which, considering the level of technology awareness in Venezuela, I think it was considerable. It wasn't the main way that people exchange money, but it was growing and it was considerable, and it was also not punished, right? Like the government never try to even regulate local Bitcoins. They tried to regulate mining, right? So they had these licenses for mining, but not transacting.
Exactly. Not transacting and not trading. At least not officially. I'm sure that there were acts of people finding out who the traders were, bribing, and unofficial taxes.
All of the regular Venezuelan stuff. Okay. You mentioned that banks didn't adopt it at the time crypto, in this case the petro in Venezuela, and something that I have found, maybe it's because I'm not that aware, but I feel like big corps are not adopting blockchain as a whole, especially in the case banks are not adopting crypto as a financial asset. But overall, when I talk with my clients, I haven't seen a major adoption of the blockchains by big corps, but a big adoption by startups. Mm-hmm. Is that the case? Have you feel anything different?
Well, I think cryptocurrencies are more of a bottom-up phenomenon, right? We're trying to build parallel finance, right? We have the financial system that works very well for what it is for, right? Like if you're Portuguese, you're born here, maybe your parents get you an account when you're 15 or 12, and then the banks nowadays have accounts for younger people, and they encourage you to save, and you have access to all the things that you might want in the system. So you have a lot of financial privilege if you're born in a place like this. If you're born in Cuba, or if you're born in Argentina, if you're born in Venezuela, if you're born in some places in Africa, right? There's less that you can access, and that's why I think blockchains have found a niche, that this technology is useful for building parallel finance, for the odd case where the financial system that you have access to doesn't serve you. So, for example, in the case of Venezuela, a lot of people want access to the US dollar, and they want digital access to the US dollar because they maybe want to pay someone that's abroad or receive payment from someone that is abroad. Maybe you want to be a freelancer in Venezuela or in Argentina and you want to get paid. You don't want to get paid in pesos or in bolívares. You want to get paid in the currency in a more international currency, or the currency of the company that's paying you. And there might be a workaround with PayPal and Skrill and these, fintech 1.0 technologies, right, or technology companies. But if you use stablecoins, which are a specific type of cryptocurrency that is pegged to the value of the US dollar, there's a lot more that you can access, because there's a growing ecosystem that accepts this token as the unit that circulates, and it's considered as valid as the US dollar in a database in Bank of America or Chase, right? So that's important. You as a Portuguese citizen can have access to Euro account and maybe even a dollar account. But if you want access, or if you're Venezuelan and you want access to the dollar, it's you have to kind of go to technology and go, and big corporations don't often realize this because they also have a lot of financial privilege. If you're a company you have a headquarters in Portugal, and maybe you have relations with companies in the US, and maybe you went to the US and you opened a US account, or Hong Kong, whatever, you have more resources at your disposal, and the banks will treat you better because you're a company, you're producing, and you're paid.
And you can arbitrate on the multiple financial systems, and
Exactly. Now, what this empowers the individual to do is to do the same thing that they could do, or that the companies could do, but now the idea, at least, is that everyone can do this. Like arbitraging the markets, trading between currency pairs, and moving from one system to the other without necessarily, traveling to a new place, getting a visa and going to the States and getting a bank account in the States. That's
the investment is quite low at this point. Yes. You just need to open a Coinbase account.
Exactly. Or even if you don't want to use Coinbase, you can just generate a wallet on your computer with no requirements. You just need to run software. You with some cryptography, you can generate a private key, public key, and then you receive money there. Yes, if you want to exchange it, you need some kind of relationship to entities around you, and probably you're going to have to show ID, and you're going to have to. I'm not saying everything should be unregulated, or that's the goal of parallel finance, or that should be the goal. But I think the goal should be to open more doors than what are currently open. And in a moment where banks are telling you, oh no, we can't open more doors because there's a lot of risk, right? But risk depends on who you are. Like you, as a Venezuelan, you can go to Venezuela and you know where there's risk and you know where there's not a lot of risk, so you can take more informed decisions. But a bank in the US will not serve Venezuela in the same way that you would, right?
Of course. And as Venezuelan, the highest risk is keeping your savings at a depreciating, constantly highly depreciating asset.
That's something that everyone can agree to, that they need. And nowadays, the banks are offering dollar accounts in Venezuela, but they're very limited because the government has not officially recognized the dollar as currency, and I think the US is pressuring for them not to do that. And so the system's not interconnected, so good luck trying to send some balance from your Venezuelan bank account in dollars to an account elsewhere. That's not going to happen. But if you use blockchain technologies, if you use a stablecoin that runs on top of Ethereum or on Polygon or some blockchain, you can probably do it a lot faster and cheaper than if you try to use institutions.
Of course. Yeah, I never thought about stablecoins as a way of saving, of having access to a stable currency for saving on this kind of economies, but it's for sure I guess a major use that we in Venezuela could have, or Argentina now is also having 100% inflation or something.
And that's partly what we discovered with the Open Money Initiative. We went to Venezuela, we did some interviews, we kind of went into the field and did some prototypes. And one of the things that we found was that people wanted access to, wanted to move money in and out, right? Which is, it can seem obvious, but the ways that people were doing it, the majority of people were not using blockchain technology, but there was an opening for more people to use it. And so that's when I joined Value. This company was started, right around at the same time I started Open Money Initiative, and they had an operation sending money from Colombia to Venezuela. And the way they did it was, in Colombia they used the Colombian peso, so they received Colombian pesos from Venezuelans who wanted to send money home, received Colombian pesos. With those Colombian pesos they bought Bitcoin. With those Bitcoin, they sold the Bitcoin in Venezuela, thus getting bolívares, and then they sent those bolívares to the account of the person. So it was using Bitcoin as an intermediary currency, which we found a lot, like in some of the interviews that we did with the more technical people, with the more curious people, they were using local Bitcoins in that fashion to be the intermediaries and to exchange money. But abstracting away the Bitcoin part, because people weren't particularly interested in Bitcoin as an investment, because some people in Europe and the US, I think, are more interested in Bitcoin as, this is an asset that can grow, this is digital gold. That's a completely different conversation, right? And it can have its merits. But I think in Venezuela, what we observed at the time is people want to exchange money, and they want dollars, they want pesos, or people with pesos, they want bolívares so that people can buy things, or they want to send dollars, right? So that intermediation, I think, was the first opportunity that we noticed, and I went to join Value because I was convinced that sending pesos to bolivares would not work for that much longer. So we needed to pivot the company into digital dollars, right? We kind of worked together when I joined to create a stablecoin of sorts. The stablecoins weren't really a thing back then. It's a very new thing. So we kind of invented our own mechanism to hedge against the value of Bitcoin and turn Bitcoins into dollars. So we had a short position, or like it was an inverse, a perpetual swap. It was like financial instruments that we as an institution could do because we had access to exchanges and we had access to institutions that could let us do this. And we had IOUs for the user. So like it was like a token that represented ownership in this many dollars, and we could liquidate those dollars using Bitcoin on behalf of the user, right? So we kind of were an institution that held these assets on behalf of the user. And when the user told us they wanted to liquidate them, so like, oh, you have $20, or it was used for very low amounts, right? So you have in your balance $100, and you can cash out gradually to bolivares, so you wouldn't lose your money, right? So if you got paid today, and we actually did with the professors from Universidad Simón Bolívar and with the hospitals in Venezuela, we did some pilots where they got paid in dollars, like the doctors and employees and professors, they got paid in dollars, and then they got their own account at value, so they could see the balance at first, which is a powerful thing to be able to see that you own dollars in a digital form, not just like money under your mattress. Like there's a balance. There's an institution that cares about you enough to provide you with dollars on a phone screen that's always accessible, right? And then we provided a way for them to cash that money out into the Venezuelan financial system, so you could turn those dollars into bolivares via Bitcoin. But no one really cared about the Bitcoin part, so we didn't even mention it. We had the FAQs, and we had, like, if you wanted to know how it worked, we told you. But I think it was the very, very first realization there was like, no, people don't really care that much about Bitcoin specifically, or about blockchain technology, or about the database. It's like normal people don't think about databases on a daily basis. They don't need to, because it works. So the system works. So in this case, the database that worked for us was the Bitcoin blockchain and the local Bitcoins order book, right?
That makes total sense. Okay, getting into again more, maybe a bit out of the financial systems. So there is all of this trend of Web3, decentralized apps, etc., that the blockchains allow. And a pattern that I have found quite interesting on these kind of startups, and maybe that's why I think big corps haven't adopted that much blockchain. I think it's mainly because of a business model thing. So business model in businesses are mainly direct cash flow consumer company. In startups, I have seen all of this trend of microeconomies inside the startup itself with their own tokens, where they also compensate the user with some of the tokens for actions they take in the platform. So it's more like a microeconomy inside each startup, which you will need to reinvent the business model for big corps to adopt it. And that is something I have found interesting, especially in the context of AI, because it basically enables you to execute a lot of use cases around data transaction, computational power, transactional filtering models, and predictive power. Okay, so maybe I would like to dive, if you agree, now on potential uses of these decentralized systems, which I always mention as distributed systems by error, because it's basically it's not necessarily this executing everywhere. It's like the control of the database, it's spread. It's more like that, right?
Yeah. That's, I think, the distinction that I draw between the word distributed and decentralized. Distributed means about location. So you have data centers or servers or nodes or whatever in different locations around the world. Decentralized, in theory, or according to the original, crypto ethos, because crypto is more than an area of knowledge or technology. I think it's also kind of a way to see the world and a way to support maybe libertarian values or values of sharing power. Democracy, I think, is very adjacent to these terms as well. So decentralized means that the power is distributed, or that the power, there's a power structure that is specified, and it should be distributed among the different actors, not necessarily geographically. Geographic is a big thing, because if everyone's concentrated in the same business or in the same office space, that makes the system very vulnerable because you can blow up that space and it's over, right? So distribution in physical space is important, but I think also distribution of power is important.
Yeah, especially now. I mean, the new oil is data, right? That's what people say, and we are now generating a lot of data for companies in the form of engagement. So they get for the exchange of engagement. So they create engagement on us. They bring entertainment, Facebook, Instagram, etc. And in exchange for that, we provide data that they use for advertising. So something that I feel blockchain can solve, and this new trend of microeconomies inside startups, where users get somehow compensated by their actions, is data ownership and data and some retribution, some payment for that data. So you kind of own that data, and you could get paid, I guess, by the use of that data by AI systems. And I think that's a reality that would happen with blockchain, that before blockchain will be super tricky, which is how can you guarantee that people accessing your data is paying a fee for that, if
right,
something of the sort.
Yeah, because you can think of blockchains as internet native money or internet native assets. So you can keep track of how much you have paid in a given token to a given person, and it's very compatible with APIs. It's very compatible with, if you do work for someone, it's very difficult to prove to someone that you sent them money in a financial system X, right? Maybe with Stripe and with these fintechs, it's easier, but there's still a level of arbitration. There's a level of, Stripe didn't process the payment, or it's not entirely predictable what's going to happen, because you're going to delegate the financial transaction, to third parties. In the case of blockchains, you can actually ensure that the transaction occurred, and you can verify, if you send out a Bitcoin payment, and then you can see the hash, you can see the transaction on the block explorer, that transaction happened. There's no dispute about it. There's no way to claw it back. The money is gone. You already paid this person. So it's a way to prove, essentially, and to be more diligent about making payments. The other angle that I see to this as well is some companies. I see some companies trying to build more in public and more as communities, and to compensate not only their early employee pool, which we traditionally do through stock and shares, but also their user base, right? And so it's very common among cryptocurrency projects, sometimes very well-intentioned ones, sometimes very technically amazing people are building this. And we have seen the phenomenon of airdrops. I don't know if you're familiar, but if you are a user of a given protocol, cryptocurrency, primitive, app, maybe it's a wallet that you use, and they can detect that you have used it this many times, maybe they will airdrop you. That's a term for it in the community. Some tokens that maybe in the beginning don't have any value, but then they will start trading on some markets, and then I've known people that have gotten thousands of dollars in airdrops because they have been early users of a technology, and this also had never happened before, right? It's a new way to transfer value, but this starts to get into the regulated space, right? Because you're obviously compensating someone for doing something, and that can be legitimate. But also, if you make your whole game about promising future returns from this token and encouraging people to buy these tokens, because remember, these tokens, they don't have value until they enter the market, and in the market there can be a lot of manipulation, and it's very difficult to detect and to enforce rules on markets that are international, and where there can be actors that have that can be faking transactions between them to make it appear as though there was a lot of volume trading and there's really nothing, just two people.
Right? And even before considering it is an asset, even the fact that money you are making by transacting your data or by operating airdrop, how should it be taxed? Is it active income? Is part of your salary? Are you a business in that sense? Or is it portfolio income or capital gains?
Or is it like a supermarket that gives you, a voucher for free stuff, right? It can be like a gift card. It can be like something that you fill out a survey from Continent, right? And they give you, I don't know, something that's worth to them is worth $2, and to you it's worth $5, right?
Exactly. That's not money you are getting. That is a voucher. Then you will use inside the platform, which is the regular use. So as long as you don't get out of the platform with that money and you just transact it then as an asset,
right,
then everything becomes easy.
But the useful thing about these assets is precisely that you can trade them, right? Because you want to trade them for money that you can use. So it gets complicated.
Yeah, we're getting into this thing that the transaction is validated and is guaranteed by the system itself. I think this has a lot of implications. I mean, here I'm talking within the context of users granting access to their data in exchange for a token or for a certain amount of money. The transaction itself is a proof of the access to this data, right?
Yeah.
Or the smart contract or whatever you want to place that. So in terms of data governance, it has a massive role on understanding how the data move between hands. So how the data actually got access and who got access to the data. I think for data governance, this is like game changing in a sense, because it's like you have full visibility and full and actual proof of who got access to this, because the blockchain shows
everything
that,
is recorded there. Yes,
exactly, not because someone built a log of access and
you can fake logs. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So I think in terms of data governance and data quality, all of this, people can compensate other people for their data according to the value that data gets generated, and we have all of these reputation systems inside these kind of startups or these kind of blockchain startups, where people start giving more value to certain blocks than others. It's something like that. I don't understand the actual basis, but
yeah, I mean, you can think of blockchain transactions or the ledgers of blockchains as a more transparent database than your banks, right? Like, as a business, you want to strike a balance because you don't want to publicize your every expense to the world so that competitors can see, oh, this business is vulnerable and we're going to attack it this way, right? You want to protect your business. So there's room for privacy, and there's a need for privacy that is very important. But there's also the kind of sometimes the perception that cryptocurrency is about hiding things and not being and being fully secluded and private. And blockchain transactions by
definition,
not by definition, but like almost all blockchains in operation today are transparent. You can if you know, of course, you have to have a mapping of pseudonymous entities, right? Because like you're not going to know that this address belongs to Kelwin unless you have that mapping, right? And you need to acquire that mapping. But Coinbase, for example, has probably one of the world's largest mappings, and Binance as well, right? So the big crypto companies acquire these mappings, and they have to use them to fight money laundering. They have to use them as they're required by governments, right? So there's room for having a transparent log, as you say. So if you want that data that is governed in only this fashion, like you always you want to set up a network of data sharing, that the rule is whenever you give access to my data, or when this machine gives access to its data, we're going to pay this $1 per day. So you can see how many days has this machine been given $1, and then you can have a very clear, transparent idea of how many days and which days, and you can build on that. So I think it has a lot of good use case still. Like blockchains, it's still new, and it's still we haven't explored the full potential. I think for now, the financial infrastructure use case, and then maybe we can also get into this a bit more, the decentralized social networks. But yeah, in the context of data sharing, who has the obligation to be transparent? It's usually governments and public sector institutions, right? So I think this can be also a very good use case that people haven't figured out yet, or it hasn't landed on people that, oh, they can actually have a more transparent accounting operation. So this can be used to fight corruption. This can be used to obviously
to grant citizens access to information.
Yes.
About how their money is being spent.
Yeah, you can use it for like forensics of if you want to analyze if a system is already set up with such rules. The thing is, I think you have to convince people to set up the system with the rules, and sometimes that's difficult because they prefer to work in the shadows sometimes, right?
And change the rules as they discover them. That's a big issue.
That's also
companies that you are discovering the rules.
Exactly. Yeah, that's also important. Smart contracts are immutable by default. So we are finding that, software needs to evolve, according to human needs. We can't just let software be governed by the code that that was running back in 2017 or so. But the smart contracts that are deployed today on the Ethereum blockchain, they can't be changed, and that can have some good properties. Because you may want to use an older version of a contract that specifically serves you, and that's always going to be available. So, dead links, for example, are not a thing. If you use a blockchain that is sufficiently distributed, like the Bitcoin or the Ethereum blockchains, you can actually store data in those databases, and you can be damn sure that they won't ever disappear. So when I got married, I etched a kind of a note in the Bitcoin blockchain, because I know that's always going to be there. Like it's very unlikely that the Bitcoin blockchain will disappear. So you can like log text in there. You can use it for that, for transparency and for data persistency, right?
Yeah, I think that both transparency, persistency, including a good feedback loop on how you monetize this data, could help create better, higher quality data. For example, in market research, companies are already paying end users for answering surveys. You have all of these companies paying cents for answering, but there is no incentive of answering truthfully, and so it's kind of garbage data that they get. But if you have the right incentive, and I think blockchain, because of that, it's perpetual, it's transparent, and it's most likely these systems are built within a microeconomy where you are compensated for that. And as long as you can compensate more people, as more people want access to that data to train their models or to do their analysis or to make decisions, you have like the right feedback loop for people to generate better data.
Yeah,
I think
you could. This can help change the incentives.
Yeah.
But incentive design is one of the most difficult things.
And keeping the incentives fixed can create like catastrophic loops in the end.
Yeah.
So
you always need people in charge of revising the incentives, and that's actually the role of government. And that's why I think I in particular have been very frustrated about the attacks and the just the ignorance of this technology in like coming from the public sector, because we should be natural allies of the public sector, like people working in blockchain technology and people working in government. There's a lot that we can learn from each other, and there's a lot that we can apply. So I think it stems from the fact that a lot of people working in government don't have a technical background, and they're not sufficiently interested in technology. And I think smart states like China will kind of dominate that, and they will use it for their purposes. And they already use AI for a lot of things, and they might use other technologies that like to fit their purpose.
Yeah, I guess there are, besides the issue of not being mutable, and actually the issue of not being mutable may have a limitation here. I'm not sure if it is solved or not, which is in GDPR, for example, you have the right to be forgotten, right? So you have the right to tell Facebook, you know what, remove my entire data. I don't want my data being stored, but here it's immutable, right? So
yeah.
you're already shared.
So if I publish that, I don't know, you're fat,
yeah, exactly.
And like you started running, but like you publish, oh, Kelwin's fat, and that's there on the blockchain.
Yeah.
There's no one that can remove it. It's not like even with all the computing power in the world, we could not remove it. So there is that's an interesting clash, right? Like between people who want to have data always be governed by people in the end, and that people can decide to take it out, and machines and incentive systems that are in place that I think we're gonna have to live with the fact, and GDPR is going to have to live with the fact that there's just some forms of data that cannot be erased. You can limit for example, you can order a block explorer company that's based in Europe to not read that block that says that, right? So you can say, oh, this is not accessible in the EU. You can depending on the rule that you're following, you can execute that rule. But the raw data
will be there.
It's always there. Yeah.
And again, you could incentivize companies to store personal data that you don't want to be there raw in the world. And there is a lot of work now on homomorphic encryption to keep the value of data without exposing the actual personal data.
Yeah. Yeah, there's homomorphic encryption is it's something that I wanted to get more into, like personally, like know more about it. There's a lot of promise there. There's now zero knowledge proofs are also an area of research that's very active. And so how do you zero knowledge proofs are a way to for us to share information in a way that for example, I need to prove to a bouncer guy that is letting people in the club that I'm over 18, right? And when I show him my ID, it says my date of birth, but it also says my name. It says it has my photo.
Your current names in Portugal, your height.
Right. It has a lot of information that they don't need. So zero knowledge proof is an area of knowledge as well, and it's a way that you can kind of share or prove that by doing a local computing operation to prove something. Okay, this I've computed this result and it's here. I can prove this to you, but I'm not going to reveal the whole data that led me to this conclusion. I'm just going to reveal the conclusion, and you can check that the conclusion is sound according to these system rules, right? And
okay, so the validation is proof. So you're showing the validation of the raw data that will make the other person do the validation.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So that's a very cool idea too, and active area of research.
Yeah. So here, I see a lot of use cases of blockchain technology and AI. There is all of this thing of sharing data, being compensated for the data you share. There is also, I think, a big applications that governments are not taking benefit of that, which is copyright data, because you have the proof that you produced this copyrighted content in the blockchain, and you were the first author. Actually, you have this validation here, right?
Yeah, proof of. So if you can have a persistent cryptographic identity, you own a private key, and you can keep that. That's, I think, a good application of blockchains that started with a financial system, because I can have a private key and I can store money there forever, because the money is never going to leave there unless I instruct it to with my private key. But you can also store bits like, oh, this is my identity, this is my picture, this is my date of birth, and you could use that data to authenticate yourself in different places. That's something that you can use. Yeah.
There's another use. So we have in AI, basically, we have data, we have computing power. Okay, and I guess you can democratize with blockchain, you can democratize computing power for companies, so they can pay end users for training their models locally. And there is this knowledge area in machine learning, which is federated learning, where you don't train the models in a centralized manner. So you'll never get access to the actual data from the end users. And this is actually life-changing in terms of GDPR, because companies do not need to take the risk of getting the data. They just share the model with the end user. The end user trains locally and returns the new model. And then models get aggregated, and of course you can compensate people for that training.
That's amazing. Yeah.
So I think it's an area I haven't been seen very explored yet, mainly because of the limitations of federated learning, how you actually train models in a robust manner with very limited data by the end user. Maybe you are talking here about a single data point that the user is generated and you want to retrain. But I think this will be the path where blockchain and AI can be integrated. And the third point for me, so we have data, then we have computing power in the form of federated learning with compensation mechanisms and proof that you actually trained that model. And then we have consensus on predictions. There is this company name called Numerai. I don't know how to pronounce it in English. It's Numer.ai, where basically they are investing in the market, okay, but crowdsourcing the intelligence of all the data scientists in the world, okay. And then you stake. So you give your predictions, you stake on that, and they use this distributed AI knowledge to get a better prediction of how the market is going to perform. The data is encrypted with homomorphic encryption, so you don't know what you're predicting, to avoid biases on the way you deal with one company or the other on the market. And then in the end, they have thousands of data scientists working for them, right? It's not like a hedge fund or whatever that only has 50, 60, 100 data scientists. Right. They have thousands of data scientists building models, and then data scientists get compensated in the forms of a token, in this case the numerai token, that then you can transact in an exchange for your models. Basically, you are building models, and you are building a better global model with a consensus system across the blockchain and across I mean, they are building like a meta model for this prediction. I think that's the ultimate way blockchain can support AI, which is instead of trusting a single model or a single decision making by a single person that has its own biases and limitations on the way they analyze the data, you could actually distribute decision making. And by this effect of the knowledge of the crowd, you know that the average prediction of 1,000 people will be better than each one of the individual predictions. You could build much more robust AI systems by delegating the predictions to the whole world, to the crowd.
Yeah, and then the way you align the incentives is through having this common token or common, payment system. That again, I think the incentive design there is the most important thing when that interface between the AI and blockchains.
Yeah, I have played a bit with Numera, so I'm not sure about how is the whole incentive, but I know that you have to stake on your predictions, so you put money on them. So that's how they ensure you're not putting garbage predictions.
Yes.
Because you're putting actual, not money, but tokens that you can transact in money. So it's money in the end.
It's like betting.
Exactly.
You're
you're bidding on your predictions. So that is an incentive for producing good predictions, and then they are paying you back, depending on how good your predictions perform in the market. It's basically this concept, and I find that very interesting. I won't say end-to-end. Well, actually, they cover also the end-to-end usage because they also have another system where you contribute with data, and then depending on how much the AI systems use that data, you get paid in tokens again.
But then you need to trust a certain part of the system, right?
In this case, you need to trust Numeraire, the Numeraire organization, which produces the meta prediction based on all the individual ones. Yeah.
I think, when people think about crypto or blockchains, they naturally tend to think okay, now we don't need trust anymore. But I think it's the evolution. Trust is a gradient, and the ability to trust different institutions, I think, is just extremely valuable. Because having options is the best thing, right? And using blockchains opens those possibilities for you. One interesting thing that I think was a unexpected segue from crypto to AI, or unexpected, interface between the two, was Ethereum used to be mined. The way that new tokens and new blocks were added to the blockchain was through mining. So mining was a very resource-intensive operation where you had to use GPUs to calculate, to actually just make a lot of work and prove that you did the work in terms, because you need to find a hash, right? So it's not an interesting problem in it itself, right? It's not something that you're doing to advance science, right? Let me find the value of this hash. No, it's a very mechanical problem, but the way that you're doing it protects the network, because not every, kind of how money works is you need to do a certain amount of work to be able to prove that you are kind of protecting the network, right? So Ethereum switched from mining, proof of work mining, to now proof of stake. So the GPUs were suddenly idle. They didn't need to do lots of computations per second to be able to be in the network but rather the mechanism by which Ethereum was updated or was adding new blocks and transactions were validated was through staking, which is more like a bet where you have some part of your assets you're putting them and you validating the protocol rules, and if you violate the rules, your stake gets slashed, which is you lose money essentially if you don't follow the rules that the protocol defined. So when that happened, and this happened in October of last year, very recently, a lot of GPUs were idle, like they didn't know what to do with them. So a lot of the companies that owned and individuals who owned like massive GPU farms, they just switched to making generative AI, right? So they plugged into the networks that are now being used by OpenAI and the like Midjourney and these companies, right?
So you will say that the hardware progress that has accelerated AI and blockchain is in part shared. So we can.
I think so, yeah. in cryptocurrency, there's also this notion of or this specific processors called ASICs, and they are very geared towards one type of operation, which is just hashing, right? And maybe they're not well suited for AI, right? Sure. But in Ethereum and other cryptocurrencies that are reasonably popular, you did have to, or you still do have to mine through the GPUs, and now the GPUs we found I guess a better use for them.
The new hype is a generative AI, so now people is interested.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So how can AI support blockchain? So we already cover hardware development. So as NVIDIA and other companies work to produce their hardware for AI, more or less inherently they will produce their hardware to mine and to make it more efficient on the blockchain. What are use cases you will suggest? So inefficiencies in blockchain or on blockchain applications that could be solved by AI.
I think, well, I personally have used AI to augment my own capacities, like working in a crypto company. So it's a very indirect way of helping, but I mean, I can write emails faster. I can, do a lot of things with ChatGPT and with Midjourney, like producing assets for marketing and things. So that's a very indirect, and this obviously can help not only blockchain, but every industry. I think being exposed to different ideas and people who are now doing the crossover between, like maybe they started in crypto and now they're more interested in AI or vice versa, that this cross-pollination of very different fields, I think can be useful, and companies like Numerai kind of are riding on top of both
there is
innovations.
Technologies, for sure. Yeah, I think so. I mean, how to manage all of these networks? I mean, they're very
inefficient by design.
Exactly. So, and AI has supported the energy markets for a few years, forecasting demand, forecasting cost, etc. So maybe we could manage in a better way these systems if we somehow grant public access to.
Maybe there's a way that we can invent consensus mechanisms that are more energy efficient, and that was one of the big debates when Ethereum moved to proof of stake. The Bitcoiners are very against it because they think that proof of work is the fairest and the most ideal way to enforce network rules, but no one will deny it's very expensive. I think people disagree on whether the cost is justified, because Bitcoin is immensely useful to all of the things that we mentioned before, like financial access, but it's also expensive. Like the Bitcoin network is expensive to run, and we don't have unlimited. We haven't invented fusion yet, so maybe AI will invent fusion, and then we'll have unlimited energy, and we'll solve every problem. That's like the shortcut answer. But I think AI maybe could help us also invent better consensus mechanisms. Ethereum is trying proof of stake, and it has worked so far. Like the network is working as designed, and it's running with much less energy than it used to last year. So but that was run by humans. Like that it was humans that are involved in the Ethereum protocol and care about its development, that are like kind of iterating that. In Bitcoin, it's really difficult to change things, but in other networks that are maybe they exist now or they'll exist in the future, we may be able to use AI to kind of iterate.
Yeah, I was thinking mainly about distributing who is going to validate, depending, for example, where are you getting more renewable energy at this time. Let's say I predict that in 2 hours I will get a lot of renewable energies in Porto. So maybe I start migrating who is validating the transactions for the next 2 hours, mainly to this region or to these few regions instead of randomly assigning them. But I guess that will create that will distort the equilibrium of anyone could get potentially access to these.
Right. Yeah, it's tricky because it's you want democratization of power, but you also want efficiency. So that those two things sometimes enter in.
They are conflicting goals. Yeah, those are conflicting goals. Another one that I was researching was basically fraud detection on KYC. So in the end, as you mentioned, the most clear use case that you have solved with blockchain technology is the financial system, so transacting money. And then there is a lot of fraud, and fraud is like that area where AI has gained a lot of attention over years. In Know Your Customer, you always have all of these biometric traits that must be validated, so you can sign them on the blockchain, and their AI, of course, facilitates all of this work.
Yeah, typically, know your customer and these primitives are used by companies that somehow have to touch the financial system, or I mean, arguably every company needs to do this, but companies that are providing this kind of bridge between the traditional financial system and the crypto economy. But I think so. We have a problem in the cryptocurrency space, which is that we want more people to be kind of self-sovereign, to have their own keys and to only transact using the blockchains that are available, not go to the regulated system for some things, right? Because this is the way that we prove, okay, this is a legitimate network. It's as powerful and as empowering as the traditional system, and even more empowering in some cases, like Venezuelans or Argentinians who have different needs. It's difficult when you want to prove that you are you, or like that you own this private key, and you don't have access to the device all the time, or maybe it's a key that you want to keep kind of hidden. I think the problem of remembering these private keys is hard for most people. I think techies have devised workarounds around it, but I think if there can be integrated hardware and software systems, so such like, for example, Face ID is something that works on certain wallets that are running on your phone, that they check your biometrics before you make a transaction to make sure that it's really you who's sending it, and you don't need to remember your key or to input your key to your private key to do that, right? Because the phone has your key and maintains the key kind of stored in a secure enclave on your phone. But then being able to use better and better techniques for identifying your face or for proving that you are you for biometrics, I think can help not even having to go to a company that legally needs to have your ID on record, but rather doing it as a first principles thing, like as a bottom-up thing. So like, I need to prove that I'm me. It's like when you meet someone that you know, you recognize the face, and I don't need to ask for your ID to know that you are Kelwin, right? So in a way, a system that is smarter, and a system that uses AI in a smarter fashion, might be able to identify the user at all times. And so, for example, maybe in the future we don't need to have private keys anymore because there are systems that are reliable, and you are the private key, right?
Yeah, so in the end, I guess it could accelerate adoption by making the process more seamless in the way that ChatGPT, I think about it as an interface between humans and machine that is more seamless, so will accelerate adoption of people executing tasks on machines just because of the simplicity of executing it. Maybe AI in the part of biometrics could accelerate the adoption of blockchain.
Yeah.
Okay, so we are heading towards the end of the episode. I would like to wrap up with regulation. So I think it's a big concern now, especially in AI, because of all of this hype of generative AI, but also in cryptocurrencies have been like a factor of 5 between different stakeholders. If it should be regulated or not, if it fights or not the very nature of blockchain and cryptocurrency. So what are your thoughts on regulation of both AI and cryptocurrency?
I think I'm very concerned that states don't know enough about the technologies and what they are useful for in order to regulate them appropriately. I'm not a full-on libertarian that doesn't believe in any kind of regulation. I think there's a role for the state and a role for the common goods. But I do think that lately the states in the Western world, and maybe also in other parts of the world, have done harm in over-regulating things. Like, I think a good example that we can all agree on is the cookie dialogue on every website that you see. Like, maybe in the EU you're too used to it, but if you're coming from, I live in Panama, and coming here, I'm super annoyed at having to click all the X's on the websites that I visit because of the cookie disclaimer. That doesn't actually do anything, because people get used to the cookie disclaimer and their behavior doesn't change. They're not more aware that they're being tracked, or that the cookie is being used for this or for that. Not necessarily because of the cookie. So it's a bad solution and the system evolved in this way, and now practically every website has to have the cookie disclaimer. So that said, for example, I think I like parts of GDPR regulation. I'm pro-privacy, and I think there have been some good efforts, but I'm concerned that that these technologies are not well understood and their use cases, and in some cases maybe it's just that also maybe they are understood, but the people who benefit from them are just not politically relevant. In the case of cryptocurrency, this happens more because it's a very cross-border technology. So if you want to protect American interests, for example, you may want to protect people from their own investments, right? Like that. So that's what the SEC is very active and trying to block companies from offering what they consider to be securities in the US. But maybe some Americans could benefit from having these investments, and this, you have to strike a good balance, and you can't apply blindly law from the 1930s. The Securities Act is from the 1930s to the world that we live in. That's much more interconnected. That's much more where like the internet has changed everything, and I think the politicians have yet to adapt, and I think it's concerning kind of overall, right, for both. Maybe we can get a bit into what you're concerned about in AI, or what you see in AI.
Yeah, I think in AI they are like regulating the entry, which is the technology, and not the application itself, not the end application or the end effect, the consequence of what could AI solve. Because if you think like AI can hurt, so regulate AI. Well, in the end, the Constitution already forbids you from hurting people. So you don't need a specific regulation for being AI, or hurting people with a book, or hurting people, I don't know, with a gun. I mean, there is already a regulation for that. So I don't see any advantage on regulating harm specifically from AI, as if it was any special tool, especially because then governments are like bailing themselves out from this regulation. Like, you cannot do biometrics on public spaces unless you are the government. And that's kind of concerning, okay?
Yeah.
For me, the way it's been written at this point. Then I guess my main concern with regulation is that it advances much more slower than technology. So it's always falling short in some areas and falling too strict in others. So regulation doesn't have a proper feedback loop to evolve continuously. Yeah. And thanks God it doesn't have this kind of feedback loop, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to keep pace with regulation. So if regulation evolves every day, you will be a criminal every day because you don't know what is going on. But in the end, it slows down this kind of adoption of technologies. Again, I don't believe AI should be regulated as an individual thing, because of most of what people try to regulate with AI is already covered by other laws. They are just making it explicit by saying it is with AI. Then, of course, we have all of this concern of, you produce an AI, the AI hurts someone who is liable for that damage. Is the user, is the person, is the tool, is the company that produces the tool. And most of these use cases are already solved, for example, with guns. So if you kill someone with a gun, the gun is not going to be liable for that act, in the same way that AI shouldn't be liable from the act, because it's an object, right? Objects shouldn't get liable, it's a tool. The company that produces the gun or the AI, I guess, shouldn't be liable unless the company itself is the one that actions that action.
Yeah, they made specific actions to empower, like if a company dedicates to helping criminals, of course, and it's a pattern, right? Exactly. Then of course it's a different story.
So in the end, the person that is liable is the end user that uses the tool to commit a certain crime or certain that made a certain issue happen. So I think most of the regulation that we already have in place will work for AI, as if you consider it's just any other tool. No. And you don't say, you cannot kill someone with a gun. You say you cannot kill someone, you cannot hurt someone, then it's AI or it's a gun or it's whatever. It's already regulation in place. So I don't believe there should be such of an interest of let's regulate AI because it's a new hype, so let's regulate it. I think that's a pattern that the European Union has now. It's like a cultural thing.
They need to react to what's happening and be seen as...
And the main one regulating things. So the other day I went actually to a startup event, and there was a government official, and the audience asked about this 6-month AI pause, and if it should happen or not, and if it should, if we should take this opportunity to regulate AI. And he said something like that concerned me, which was he didn't believe on the 6-month AI pause. I agree on that, because it's not enforceable. But he said, let's regulate as much as we can within the time we have, instead of let's regulate the bare minimum that makes the technology useful with low risk. So it's always this. I feel in Europe we have this mentality of let's
overextending. Yeah. I see that a lot in the blockchain space as well. I think AI and blockchains or crypto are similar in that they are very useful tools. They apply to things that we care about deeply, right? AI can help us produce knowledge work that is faster and more thorough and like better quality, right? And that has huge implications, and that's why people are talking about regulating it. And obviously, cryptocurrency is very tied to money, right? And we regulate money for good reasons. We don't want to, for example, we punish very severely falsifying money, right? And in the case of cryptocurrency forbids, the protocol rules are forbidding the falsification of money. Like you can't make a duplicate Bitcoin and pretend it's a truthful one, right? But you can, as a company that takes advantage of the fact that people don't know this technology very well, you could produce a fake Bitcoin that is not actually live Bitcoin, and the user doesn't know how to check it. So you could say, oh, I paid you, and actually didn't pay, right? So you can ride on top of ignorance of people to take advantage. So I think, again, there's good reason to regulate money in some ways, but I think usually the reaction I have seen is overextension, and in most cases it's you choose a convenient narrative, like, oh, criminals can use this. Like, yeah, criminals can also use dollar bills. They can also use
to do money laundering
with dollar bills, or even with swapping apartments in London. Like there, how many Russian individuals who may be connected to Putin's war effort have apartments in London, and they like it's very apartments, banks, like the system has already ways for you to launder.
And less traceable ways, I will say.
And less traceable ways, for sure, yeah. And then, of course, some of these people will move over to crypto because it has appealing features, like the fact that it's very international, right? But it also, if most cryptocurrencies that keep people used today are completely transparent, then it's, as you said, less useful for this thing. But like if you see the mainstream media narrative, it's like, oh, crypto is only used for criminals, or like for it's money laundering and this and that and tax evading, and sure, it can be used for those things, but this is not inherently a technology problem. It's a human problem that the technology, I don't see that it makes it a lot worse.
The problem is already intrinsic there. It's already there.
Yeah.
Maybe you are making it easier, you are granting easier access to that problem, maybe, for some people, at least when you are talking about borderless transactions. I guess in AI it's kind of the same thing, right? So the problems already exist there. It's mainly the scale at which you can do them, make the regulation interesting. And I guess that's the point here for regulating AI, which is what is the extent and the scale at which you could do these kind of things. It's not so much about the actual things you can do or not, because those are already prevented by law, by most laws. Then, of course, in the case of blockchain, it's quite explicit, because as we were talking this morning, blockchain is more a technology than an area of knowledge, but AI is more an area of knowledge than a technology. So how can you regulate an area of knowledge, in the sense, especially an area of knowledge that is not black and white defined? So it's, what is AI? There is no consensus of what is AI. Is a logistic regression model an AI or not? Is a decision tree an AI or not? As long as you have an algorithm that adjusts a threshold with data, is that an AI?
I mean, a sorting algorithm could be some sort of, intelligence, right? Like you're executing operations.
Yeah. Nobody will call the AIs from the 70s, from the 80s AI nowadays. but they were considered AIs at the time. So the definition of AI itself is so open at this point that I find it hard to regulate AI as a technology instead of regulating the wrong usage of technology as a whole.
Yeah.
That's my main concern. Yeah. So I think that it's a final wrap up for the episode. Do you want to say anything else?
No, well, I want to thank you again for inviting me here. This is it's great to be in Porto. It's great to see you again after all these years, and hope to come back soon.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you guys for listening. I hope you learned something from this episode. I certainly did. Thank you, Alejandro, for being here. See you on the next episode, guys. Bye-bye.